Hello, welcome Fish here. This is a video on the Gazelle 342 and I'm running it from DCS 2.0.3 I think it is, the NTTR map. So this video is going to be an introduction to the Gazelle, look at some of the systems, a startup process, flight, landing, short flight and landing. What we won't be covering is we won't be looking at the navigation system, and there's a sophisticated navigation system in there. We also won't be looking at deploying the weapons or the weapon systems or the IFF or RWR. So let's get into the pit and start setting things up. So I'm just going to switch off our virtual pilot here while we set up things so that you can see more easily what we're doing. And I'm going to switch on our mini HUD on the bottom left hand side of the screen there, and this will be important to know where our controls and our inputs are. It compensates for the fact that we're in a virtual aircraft and we've got no tactile feedback. Just let me set my track IR up here. Okay, so just before we start anything, I'm going to just make sure all our controls are dead and drop our collective, and then we're going to switch on our electrical power. So battery, alternator and generator and fuel pump. Going to hack the clock, and that's going to take 20 seconds before we can engage the engine turbine. In the meantime, I'm going to switch on our anti-collision lights and turn up its brightness. Okay, we should be good to start the engine now. Start the turbine anyway. So we've got a rev gauge here on the right hand side that shows the revs for both the engine and the rotor. And you can see it's only the engine that's spinning up at the moment because we have our rotor brake on. And we need to power the main turbine up to an idle of 2500, and you can see our idle light has gone out and we're up to 2500, and now we can engage our engine. And we do this using two levers. The first lever is the brake lever, which is a big red lever here. I have it mapped to a key on my HOTAS, so it can be released easily. And the second one is our fuel flow lever, and that's essentially a throttle lever. In a normal helicopter, it would be a throttle almost like a motorcycle throttle on the collective that you rotate, but in this case it's a separate handle. In the K50 it's a separate handle on the left hand side also. I've also got this mapped, and the reason why I've got this mapped is so that we can watch this gauge as we gradually increase the value of this. It can be done with the mouse. It's a bit tricky and you can just mess around with that, but I've chosen to have it mapped to a couple of keys. I'm going to start pushing it forward, and I'm going to set it to 30% to start with. If we look down here, we're 30%. Once we hit 30% now, our rotors are going to start moving, as you can see. Now what we've got to do is we've got to wait for the two needles to synchronize, which indicates that both the rotor revs and the engine are synchronized. What we don't want to do is we don't want to have one lagging behind the other, as it puts unnecessary stress on the engine. I'm going to put on some lighting in the cabin. This switch actually works independent of the battery, so I probably should have put this on first. If it's needed in the dark, its visibility is quite good this morning. Okay, we can see those needles are synchronized now, and I'm going to push them forward a little bit more. And you can see the reason why I've got this mapped is because we're able to watch this dial and gradually inch it forward. And we can see the gauge where we want to get to is the white mark. and we get this when we're fully forward on the throttle. Goes a little bit beyond the white mark, as you can see, and we have a limit set there. We have a tight limit set for the engine revs and a slightly wider limit set for the rotor speed. And the rotor speed may vary slightly up and down depending on what load the aircraft is under and what kind of flying conditions. Now we have our engine on full. We're going to switch on gyroscope, and don't need to, but we'll have to clock again. It takes about a minute for this to warm up, and we know it's warmed up when the indicators there change from the coloured signs there to the on. While we're doing that, we're going to switch on our two autopilot buttons. First one is our autopilot brake. It engages our autopilot brake system, and this works using a button on the HOTAS. If I can see it here, just realign my track IR. If I can see it here, by clicking this button, it holds the stick in the position that I pressed it at. So it's a trim function. The second trim function is engaged with this switch here, and this allows us to use the hat to trim, and it trims it's a very fine adjustment for trim, and this is the one we'll be using most of the time. We look at our warning panel here. The only two lights left lighting are the PA switch and the pitot switch. So I'm going to switch the pitot heater on, even though we don't need it with this weather. Can't see it easily, but temperature looks like it's about 10 degrees C. So next I'm going to switch on our autopilot, and 3 channels are all switched on together, and that's pretty much most of the systems have been switched on. Now we're going to look at our gauges, and I'll go through them one by one. This is our speed, our indicated speed, airspeed. This is our ADI, and I'm going to uncage that and let it settle out. And we can adjust it if we need to by rolling the knob. Secondary ADI, again, make an adjustment to it. Radar altimeter, switch it on, and we'll rotate our minimum altitude up to something like 20, 30 meters, under which altitude this light will be on. We won't do anything with the barometric altimeter, but we would normally get the QFE from our tower, and we're not contacting the tower on this occasion because I don't have a radios. I haven't worked through the radio system yet. This is linked to our navigation system, and it points to whatever we have set up, if it's a non-directional beacon or a preset navigation point. We're not going to use this for this short flight. This is a very important gauge. It's the torque gauge, and you can see it's at 20%, and we're going to just rotate the torque bug to 90% because we shouldn't stress our engine more than 90%. We're watching this at all times. And when we're cruising, this is the gauge we need to be watching, and this gauge is adjusted through our collective here, and we shouldn't let it go above 90%. So when we're flying a rotary wing, we adjust what we're doing using the torque rather than trying to achieve a speed, because you may have a headwind or a tailwind. So for the maximum performance of the engine, you may be going slower or faster depending on the wind direction and speed. That's pretty much everything I wanted to do here. We're going to just hop into the co-pilot seat and have a look at the camera system for the weapons, for the missiles. I'm going to switch them on. The panel below here, I'm going to switch it into test mode. And our hard points here, I'm not sure which ones. I think we have only 2 on. I'm not sure whether it's, I'll guess it's the outside one. So we switch over to the outside one. And remember, it's a fly-by-wire missile, so what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't swap over this until the missile has hit. We shouldn't swap over our hard points, because otherwise the wire attached to the missile will break. Switch on our TV and switch these 2 buttons on to M, marsh. Switch them on. This one goes up to P for pilot control. And now we can see the image from our cockpit. We can slew this around, and we can zoom in using the dial here. Should we need to. We can bore sight the view by clicking on the bore sight button here, which recenters it. And on this panel here, we can switch on our laser by clicking on that button. This is our fire control button, and we can adjust contrast and brightness using left and right hat movements here. So we can change the symbology here to black, black symbology using this, or the background using this, depending on what we've got on the screen. So pretty much ready to take off now. I'm going to go back into the pilot seat. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a lot of right rudder while we're taking off here, and I'll just have a quick look. I'll show you quickly what I've got my rudder control set up to be, because I've made a slight adjustment to it. Yeah, this is it here. So you can see I've flattened out the curve a little bit in order to get a bit more fine tuning when I'm flying, but you can't flatten it out too much because you won't get enough authority, and you need a lot of rudder authority at takeoff and landing, and we'll see that. You'll see that by watching this as we take off. Okay, so we're going to push it up to 60% on our torque gauge collective. And as I start to take the weight off the skids, we're going to start sliding to the left, and I'm compensating, bringing it up very gradually up to 70, a little more than 70, and now we're airborne, and I'm just taking a little bit of rudder off. Adjusting my cyclic in order to keep myself going straight, and what we have to do is go to this junction down here and turn around and head up the taxiway out onto the runway threshold. So all the movements are nice and gentle at this stage. So all I have to do is let the rudder off, because I've a lot of left rudder on already, and pitch the cyclic forward a little bit. No rush with this. This gives you it gives you good practice at controlling. Make sure you don't pick up too much speed here, and keep the skids off the ground. I don't have any trim adjusted here. I'm still working at neutral trim and just making fine adjustments. Making fine adjustments to my collective also, but we don't ascend in altitude too quickly. At the same time trying to keep us on the yellow line. It's completely different from the K50. K50 is much more controllable at these low speeds because it doesn't have the excessive torque, because the contra rotating rotor blades balance each other out. However, when we get into stable flight with this, it's a lot easier. It's actually quite easy to manage, and you can quite easily get a good control flight. Thankfully there's no traffic out here this morning, so we're on our own. There's nobody to observe our bad flying. Okay, just clear left and right. Steady it down. If I want to just straighten it up, I just put about 60% on and fly left or right rudder. Okay, pull back now fully on collective, and this is where I normally set up my QFE for our threshold altitude. And we're pretty much ready to go here. I'm going to trim, I'm going to do a fine trim adjustment here on takeoff, because I will be pitching nose forward. And it'll be a little bit quicker than the takeoff from the taxiway. So ready to go now. Again, I'm applying rudder appropriately. And once we start forward flight, rudder starts coming off quite quickly. So the rudder should be fairly neutral when we're doing full cruise speed. Pushing the collective up now to 85%. Doing a little bit of trimming of the aircraft. I'm not using our trim button quite yet, and let's wait until we leave the runway. We're still rising in altitude. We see our vertical velocity indicator here. And now I'm going to just trim it back a little bit. Well, that's a good enough altitude now. So we're going to try and get steady flight. Okay, that looks reasonably good. We've drifted off to the left of the runway. We'll have to compensate. And we look at a slip indicator, tells us how well we're at managing flying. So let's have a quick look outside now. see we're doing about 170 kilometers per hour. And now let's head back towards the airport. Controlled turns are a challenge, and I haven't managed to do it yet. You can see my altitude has risen once I started to pull on the cyclic. You can see my slip indicator's gone a little bit off there. Okay, so we're just going to head straight back towards the airbase. There's no point in flying around too long here. I think you guys will get the idea. Just a comment, it's completely different from the p60 and particularly the ground effects. So I suggest you start it up in from the end of the runway where all the controls are started, and try just taking off and doing the hover, controlling the rudder, and get control of the aircraft. As I said, flying. Once you get it into the air and forwards flight is fairly straightforward. It's the takeoff and landings that are the challenge. So we're going to start the approach now to land, and our helipad there is on the end of this taxiway here. Pulling back on my collective now in order to bleed off some speed and altitude, and I'm going to have to start putting rudder in now. It'll start to spin around very quickly now. There we go. So I have to start managing my rudder. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to go off the end of this this taxiway here, because there's a bit of dead ground there, and it causes havoc with our control. So I just need to inch forward into position. Notice the amount of rudder I have on here. Get a bit of control. So I can get down on the H. Okay, that looks pretty good. And just straighten it out. Okay, that's pretty much most of what I'm going to do. The last thing I'll do is just do a quick hover, and I have a hover button mapped here. So we're going to just take it up in the air and switch it into hover mode. So I'm going to neutralize my trimmer. Okay, so I'm going to switch it into hover mode now. I can stabilize it. Okay, so now I can let it settle. I've taken my hands off all controls, and we can see it's it's in hover collective mode. So I can now switch into the co-pilot seat if I wish, and I can slew our weapon system. Now there is a mode here, I haven't really tried it, where it should follow the camera. If I press the C switch here, I should be able to do that. It's working. No, maybe the key is not mapped. But there is a mode which allows you to, when you're in hover, to switch it on so that whatever the camera is pointing, the aircraft follows. So you see I'm adjusting collective in order to keep the aircraft at a specific altitude. It's back to pilot seat. And there is an altitude hold mode here that we can use. That overrides that. So we're going to set it down now. And I'm ready to take it out of hover mode if I need to. When we're landing from hover mode here, we just need to be careful that we don't go we don't descend too quickly, otherwise we'll get vortexing. So we're a little bit off the line here, so I'm going to have to come back on. So I'm going to have to switch autopilot off, and I forgot to apply rudder. I need to get it back in control. That's okay. Okay, so that's by way of an introduction to the Gazelle. It's quite a fun aircraft to fly. I have to say, it's more modern than the Huey, and it's reasonably easy to start up and to manage. The only challenge is the ground effects when you're landing and taking off, and that just requires practice. It can't really be learned from a video. So until next time, thanks for watching, and feel free to leave any comments as usual.